It seems you're still muted, Maria. Maybe the hardware button?
Ich weiß es ehrlich gesagt gar nicht. Also ich glaube nicht. So, ich habe jetzt da jetzt auch Einstellungen, ich lasse den Dialog vielleicht da offen. Da drinnen habe ich das Level hochdrehen müssen, das war da drinnen ganz niedrig.
Okay,
Ja,
aus welchem
das
Grund
war
auch immer.
auf 0, ich weiß nicht,
Okay.
0 ist verdächtig, vielleicht gibt es wirklich einen Button auf dem Ding, den ich nicht kenne. Aber
Okay, jetzt
das Level
schaut
sollte
wieder
jetzt
gut
wieder
aus.
passen.
Okay, danke dir.
Bitte.
Okay, I hope this is back to normal. Can someone confirm?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, then I guess you weren't hearing much of what I was saying earlier. What I was saying is that I'm really happy that so many people are registered for the course this year. We're about twice as many people as we were 2 years ago. So this means we've also restructured the exercises a bit to accommodate for that. But before we lose further time, let's just drop into the actual lecture and the exercises. So my name is Maria Eichelsleder. I guess many of you have already met me in information security last year. And I'm doing this course together with Daniel Kahles, whom you also might know from information security from the exercises. Maybe in the beginning, some clarifications on which course exactly this is. So this course used to be called Applied Cryptography until last year. It still has that name in the old curricula. So if any of you are studying the previous master's curricula, which were valid until last year and which you can still keep studying until I think 2023 or so, then you will actually find this course as Applied Cryptography in your curriculum. But with the introduction of our new information security master, you can find some information about this program here. We've also renamed some of our courses or restructured the contents a bit. And so this is the new version of this course, Cryptography, called this way for the first time this year, and it completely replaces the previous lecture. If you have some questions related to this switch of curricula, I think it's best if you contact your student representation or your Dean of Studies, or you have a look at our information here. So this new curriculum has different courses that represent all of the areas of research that we have here at IIK. So we have a lot of courses on system security, a lot of courses on application security, courses on formal methods, and a number of courses related to cryptography, which you can see summarized here. So you're currently in cryptography, which is recommended to do as a first course of all of the others, since all the others sort of build on it. And this is the basic course where we have a closer look at the building blocks of modern cryptographic protocols that are widely used and try to understand how they are built. In the other lectures in this master program, you will learn how to break these schemes, so how cryptanalytic attacks works. You can do this next summer term. This or next winter term, you can also hear more about privacy-enhancing technologies and other real-world protocols that use some advanced constructions to achieve more complicated security notions. We also have some seminars and related lectures. So first of all, the lecture on modern public key cryptography, where you learn more about asymmetric crypto, which is currently offered under the name Selected Topics in Cryptography and Privacy. So this is the main title and this is the subtitle that says what it's about. And you find it under this name in your in TU Graz Online. There's also a seminar on crypto and privacy that you can have a look at, and this is subtitled Mathematical Foundations of Cryptography. There are also 2 crypto lectures not from IIK in this curriculum. One of them is complexity analysis, problem analysis and complexity theory, which is offered by IST, so by the Institute of Software Technology. And there is another one which is currently offered by Karl Franzens Universität, which covers some basics of cryptography, so that overlaps quite a bit with this course here, but it has some interesting stuff as well that's new, and that is related to coding theory. So if you're into that, it's not listed here, but if you go to the link on the previous slide, you can find it there. There was some question related to the name change in the chat, namely whether the name of the news group will be updated. Actually, the news group is being replaced by a Discord server that we are going to use this year. So you can write in the news group. We will write there, but it's not officially monitored. So if you have questions, if you want to discuss stuff, please have a look at the Discord server that somebody already posted an invite for in the Teams chat. With that, let's jump to the actual course itself and to an introduction first of the administrative stuff that you should know, and second to some of the concepts that we will see. So what is cryptography? Well, I often say it's the mathematical backbone of security. So it's the set of mathematical methods and algorithms that makes systems secure. And people often say that cryptography is the strongest link in this security chain. What they mean by that is that if there is some application that is secured against some threats, and something breaks or there's a vulnerability, then this vulnerability is typically not in the crypto part, but it's the fault of something else. So there are some things about this statement that I agree with, such as the fact that we by now have a pretty good understanding of when cryptography works and when it doesn't and what it can provide. Also the fact that it's often easier to attack other less analyzed parts of a system, but that doesn't mean that we should always blindly trust cryptography. So in particular, cryptography can be very easy to misuse. So to use in such a way that it does no longer provide the security properties that it promises or that we expect from it. So in a sense, yes, it is the strongest link, but that doesn't mean that we should overestimate its capabilities. So it's used as a building block in almost any sort of application that you're using, hopefully, that in some way involves either your own computing devices or that does some computations on some server. So whether that is related to banking or sending messages or alternative forms of banking or any sort of communication with some server or between devices in a network, all of this is hopefully at the core protected by some cryptographic algorithms. So which aspects of this are we going to cover in the lecture? So what is the lecture about and what is it not about? It is a lot about how ciphers are being made. So we will see many of the design strategies that underlie modern ciphers, and we will also see how the ciphers can be broken, so how cryptanalytic attacks work. But here we're only going to cover some basics. So if this is something you're interested in, then I do recommend that you next summer term visit the follow-up lecture on cryptanalysis, where we will have a look in a lot more detail on these attacks. But nevertheless, attacks will play quite a role in this course, since they often explain why a cipher was made in a particular way. We will also see some of the mathematics that are underlying cryptography. So in particular, if we look at asymmetric crypto schemes, we are going to look at quite a number of different primitives used to build this stuff. And in total, what I hope to give you at the end of the lecture is a good and thorough understanding of those parts of cryptography that are relevant for most standard applications, such as TLS security. We are not going to cover every possible ingredient for every possible protocol there is. There are some other lectures, as I said, that cover some specific application areas in more detail, but we're going to look at the crypto that secures the bulk of all communication. What this course is not is a tutorial on how to build your own cipher or how to make your own practical application secure. So we do have a number of things that will be very relevant to you in case you have to use crypto in your implementation, but we're not going to cover specific technology-specific instructions, like these 5 steps to set up my web server or so. What I'm more trying to achieve is give you an understanding about what you need to watch out for and what could go wrong when you use crypto, which is technology independent and works on whether you set up your web server or whether you want to implement some secure chat or whatever. It's also, as I said, not a tutorial how to build your cipher, but it should give you a good understanding about why you shouldn't build your own cipher. And that it's complicated enough to use crypto securely. You don't need to get into even more hassle by trying to build your own stuff. Okay, so why was this course called Applied Cryptography? Well, it was and still is about applied cryptography in 2 senses. So first of all, it's about what some people call real-world cryptography. So that means this is crypto that either was or is currently being very widely used, or that I think should be very widely used in the immediate future. So things that you will actually see everywhere around you. What we're not covering too much is, let's say, futuristic crypto in the sense of all the fancy new things that current crypto research is trying to come up with. So current crypto research is a lot about coming up with very complex application scenarios. There are tons of them. This is not the main focus of the lecture here. Again, there are some other lectures which go into more detail on that. It's also applied in a second sense, and that is in the exercises, where we will hold weekly exercises where it's your job to practically do something with crypto, which will usually be trying to break it. So in these exercises you will have many small tasks, and many of them are about finding weaknesses in a crypto system. And I think that this sort of practical experience or practical understanding really gives you a deeper understanding for how crypto is built from bottom up. And if I say hands-on exercises, this usually means you're going to need quite a lot of pen and paper for many of the exercises. There are some small programming tasks as well, but for the most part these are bonus challenges. So I want you to really work with the crypto with your hands, essentially. So what are the main contents of this course? We're going to cover both symmetric and asymmetric crypto. The first in the first half of the lecture, and the second more in the second half of the lecture. And for each of them, you're going to hear a number of things that you may already know. In particular, if you've already heard information security, you will already be familiar with the concepts like the goals we are trying to achieve, confidentiality and authenticity, with some of the primitives such as block ciphers, maybe not so much with some other primitives we will look at such as stream ciphers. And you will already know that we try to build something like hash functions and authenticated ciphers from that. But I promise we will go into a lot more detail than we did in information security. Have a look at more constructions and have a much deeper look at these constructions. The same for asymmetric crypto. We're going to revisit stuff you probably have already heard, like you might already have heard about RSA once or twice. But we will also cover primitives that I think you haven't heard about much so far. This includes elliptic curves. This also includes some building blocks for post-quantum secure schemes and similar. And besides the primitives themselves, we're also going to look at a number of different schemes that you can build out of them and different protocols where they are used, such as the basis of the TLS protocol. In the very beginning, meaning today, we're also going to take a look back at crypto that is not and should not be widely used. Namely, we're going to look at a few historical ciphers, whose names, again, you might already have heard, but we'll have a look at how to break them. And finally, at the very end, I also want to highlight, or we want to highlight, some new and upcoming challenges that are closer to cryptographic research. And throughout all of this, we're going to see a lot of cryptanalysis, cryptanalysis, cryptanalysis. Because for all of the building blocks we are looking at, their design is motivated by the possible ways in which they could be attacked otherwise, if they looked different. So understanding analysis will be core to understanding the design of the ciphers. About the lecture material, these slides that I'm showing are available on the course website, which you've probably already found. There is no written long version of this, so in case you prefer reading stuff in complete sentences, then I recommend that you get one of the many good books on cryptography that are out there. I've listed just 2 recommendations here. The first one is a relatively new book, which is a very easy read, so you can start right away. It doesn't have too much complicated math or too confused writing, let's say. So it's a clean read, and it also covers more or less a similar range of topics as we do in this course here. However, I have to say that it often doesn't really go into enough detail. So there are many things that we look in more detail here in the exercises, particularly related to attacks, than this book does. But it does give you a good general overview. And finally, this second recommendation here is a bit more dated, but covers the public key stuff, for example, very well. So if you're interested or want to know more details about the number theory and asymmetric crypto stuff, this is a good read. There are also some books which are freely available online. One of them is the famous Handbook of Applied Cryptography that might also be worth having a look at. However, I have to say, this is not the sort of book you read for 15 minutes before you go to bed in the evening or so. So it has very dense writing in the sense that it's like definition, theorem, comment, example. So it's very well structured, but also a bit less well readable for that purpose. And it is also a bit dated already. So some of the more detailed or more modern concepts that we're looking at here are not really covered in there yet. So if there are any specific topics at any point that you want to read more about, I think it's best if you just ask us for a specific recommendation for that part. There are also tons of great online resources on all aspects of crypto. So both online versions of books, but also stuff like there are some podcasts, there are some blog articles that explain stuff pretty well. And for most of the topics that we're going to cover, if you have one of the usual questions, you will typically find a good answer for it by checking on Stack Overflow or wherever. Okay, so much for the background material. Now, maybe let's get to a point that will probably interest you a bit more right now, and that is how you get your grade for this course. So, the usual concept that we always had for this course is that there is a final written exam for the lecture, which is written at least on the first 2 dates after the end of the lecture. So right now we have reserved an exam slot for January and one for February, and both of those are planned to be written exam dates. At any later point, we usually did mostly oral exams, so whenever you wanted to do the exam and you had missed the first 2 dates, you just wrote me an email and we do an oral exam and that's it. Since we are many more people this year, I guess there will be more written exam dates. In general, whenever you come up with at least 3 people or so who want to do the exam at a particular point, I will set up a written exam in the near future. So I think it's best, if you currently find no suitable exam slot in TU Graz Online, that you just write to me and tell me whether you want to do an oral exam or you and your 3 friends want to do a written exam. So this exam was typically about 90 minutes, closed book, pen and paper exam, so a standard exam, which had questions on 4 of the topics in this lecture. So in total we have something like 12 topics or so, and of these 4 will be chosen and there will be several sub-questions for this. We have a number of example questions that cover the topics pretty well that are always included at the end of the slides. So if you have a look at those and if you're well able to answer all of them, then I think you have a very good coverage of the entire course. That doesn't mean that all exam questions will be from these lists, but some of them will be. Like the entire course, the questions are always going to be asked in English, but feel free to answer in either English or German as you prefer. Now, I used the term used to several times in this introduction, and that is because, of course, we have Corona times, so we need some extra rules to accommodate for that. So if everything is as it stays now, so if the TU Graz Corona traffic light remains green, yellow or orange, meaning we are allowed to do exams on campus, this is what we will do. So this is the default, that the exams are written as they always used to be, except that we have somewhat smaller groups. So fewer slots available per exam date to accommodate the Corona hygienic recommendations. However, of course, there are now some situations that weren't there before. Namely, there may be reasons why you cannot participate in such a written exam. This could, for example, be that you're in a risk group, or you're currently in self-isolating, or you might be in your home country and not be able to come to Graz or similar. So if one of these holds for you and it's not feasible for you to do a written exam, then you can always contact me for an oral exam that will be virtual. So we will set up a meeting on WebEx or Teams or whatever and go through the exam in speaking instead of in writing. In either case, the questions for this sort of exam are essentially the same as for a written exam, except that you don't write your answer, you discuss it with me. Okay, so this is unless something happens that we're of course not hoping for, and that is that the traffic lights turn red in the exam area, meaning near end of January or most of February. If that is the case, then we will have to switch from the written exams to written take-home exams. So you will have to answer all of the questions at home, also in the allotted time that we reserved for the exam. So the time won't change, but the place will change. And in case this happens, which we're not hoping, we would then set up a Discord group where we can supervise the exam, where we can address any questions you have. So you can use your audio setup then or the chat to ask if you have troubles. And the one big difference in that case, in terms of the questions, is going to be that if we have to do this, then everybody will get their own individual exam. So normally in a written exam slot, everybody gets the same questions. In the take-home exams, we will give you individualized questions. And we will also slightly adapt the type of questions. So in particular, we might have fewer sub-questions, but sub-questions where you write a bit more. So not just single word answers or so, or keyword answers, but more written text. You can write your answers either on your printed out exam sheets, or if you don't have a printer, you can write them on blank paper. And at the end of the allotted time, you scan or photograph your solution. You can also, if you're fast enough, type them on your computer right away, but it's probably easier to do it in the handwritten way. And then you submit it in the end. As for the exact submission and so on, we will fix this in case it actually happens and depending on how many people this concerns. So if there are only 10 people, for example, then you can just email us the answers. If all 80 or 90 of you decide to do the exam at the same time during red traffic lights, then we will have to come up with some other submission system, like pushing it on some Git repository or so. In any case, if this happens, we will tell you the exact technicalities at the time, but these are the rules that you should be aware of at the start of the term. What we also say is we don't really recommend taking this sort of exam route. So if, for example, this concerns only the February date or so, then we recommend that it might be better if you simply wait for a later slot where the written exams are available again, or you do a virtual exam. Because I think that will be more painless overall. Of course, if you have questions on any of this at any time, please feel free to just interrupt me and ask. This was essentially how you get your grade for the lecture, but of course we also have the exercises. Now the exercises are not just a one-point thing or one submission thing, but they will actually happen every week. So the idea is that every week after the lecture, we give you some new examples to solve. Usually there is 4 tasks and 1 bonus task, which looks similar to the math assignment sheets or so that you might be used to from your bachelor's. And the idea is that you solve those examples at home. You then tick in an online tick system called Stix. I'll give you the link later. You tick which of the examples you were able to solve. And then in the next exercise practical session, the solutions to all examples are presented by you, of course, meaning that for every task, we will pick a person who ticked this task and ask them to present it in front of the class. Now, how this influences your grading is as follows. The only rule or the only necessary condition for you to get a positive grade that is with respect to these ticks is that at the end of the term, you must have solved at least 50% of all examples. So you must have ticked on average 2 assignments per week. It's no problem at all if you miss one of the sessions or so and tick no examples the one time, simply tick a bit more the next time. You do get a few bonus points if you are particularly productive in the exercises. So for every 10% that you do more than required, you get a bonus point. So if you tick 60% of everything, you get 1. For 70%, you get 2 bonus points, and so on. And up to, if you tick at least 90%, you get a total of 4 bonus points. What do these bonus points count for? They count on top of the actual thing that makes up your mark. And those are 2 exercise exams. The first of which will be in mid-November and the second of which will be in January. So in these exercise exams, you get tasks which are very similar to those we discuss in the practicals, and you will be solving them, submitting them, and this is the main basis for your mark. So since these give 16 points each, or 32 points in total, this means that by ticking a lot, you can increase your grade by 1 thing. So for example, if based on the exams you would have had a 2, but you ticked almost everything, then you will get a 1 at the end. So you're positive starting at 16 points in total, no matter whether these are bonus points or just points in one exam or whatever. 16 points you're positive, and then it's in 4-point steps that you get to the next grade. In case you miss one of the exams, for example, because you're ill or similar, there is a second chance exam sometime in February. We will usually negotiate the date of this to make sure that it fits everybody who missed one of the exams. So again, this is the exact same slide that I had before Corona. After Corona, of course, we need to have some extra rules. So first of all the presentations are going to be online. So usually the solutions for all tasks would have been presented by you at the Blackboard, but this year this is going to happen on your screens. So we're going to conduct the exercise classes in virtual meetings like this one. So either in MS Teams or in Discord, depending on in which group you are. I'll come to that later. And to present your solutions, what we expect you to do is to somehow share them on your screen. So what you could, for example, do is you could simply write down on paper your solution for each of the tasks in a reasonably understandable way. So it doesn't need to be a complete essay, but at least the relevant formulas and so on that are necessary to understand the task. And then you simply share your screen either on MS Teams or in Discord and present your result based on a photo or a scan of your solution. If you like, you can also prepare your solutions in a Google Docs or a LaTeX or whatever you like. You can also, if you have a tablet available, simply prepare to write your solutions live on the tablet. If you want to do that, I'd ask you to test beforehand whether your precision is good enough to be actually readable. So if your setup only allows you to write something like this, this will not be very helpful, but if you can write reasonably small, such as, for example, I don't know, a squared is, I don't know, c squared minus b squared or so. This is reasonably good solution for the exercises, I would say. So if you want to do this, please test it beforehand with us. Otherwise, if you just want to show your handwritten solution, make sure the resolution is good enough to be able to see something on screen. So this is for presenting the tasks. If you think that this suggestion is absolutely not feasible for you, for example, because you don't have a camera, a mic or anything, or your internet connection is so bad you have absolutely no upstream, it won't work. If you think this is not feasible for you, please contact us as soon as possible and we'll see if we can find an alternative solution for you. But this is the default way that you present something on your screen. The exams for the practicals are also going to be done at home, independent of the Corona traffic light. So they are definitely going to be online. And the mode for them is very similar to what I explained for the lecture. So the KU exams are a bit different from the lecture exams insofar as they usually involve computing things, executing an algorithm, attacking some system. So something practical where it's easy to generate many different challenges. So again, each of you will get an individual challenge. All of them are hopefully going to be equally hard or easy. But this works reasonably well to do at home and works easier than a theory test like the lecture would be. This is why the practical exam is definitely online, independent of the traffic light. Again, you write on a piece of paper or a printout, except that in this case, there are usually parts of these exams where it would be very helpful if you can actually draw on top of the assignment sheet. So for example, the assignment sheet, so the test sheet might show something like a circuit of a cipher or so, or it might show a particular message that you need to manipulate, where it's a lot easier if you can write right next to it. So this is of course easy if you have a printer. If you don't have a printer, you might want to have a look if you can find, for example, a suitable PDF editing tool or something like MS Paint where you can open a PDF and then edit it. So it would be good, I think, if you test that beforehand, whether you can find something like that. So that you can, if you can't print it to paint on top of it, you don't have to hand copy it, but you can just work on it on your screen. Are there any questions on this point so far related to the practicals? You can either write them in the chat or just speak up. I would very much prefer if you speak up if you have a question, because it's easier. I don't have to squint my eyes, but it's up to you. No questions, thanks. Okay, then I'll continue onwards from here. If you do think of some questions, please just interrupt me. And we will also have plenty of more questions, question mark slides where you can get rid of your questions. Okay, so I've already promised you a link to the system where you tick which tasks you solved. And this is it, it's called Stix. You can copy the URL from here, but of course you also find it on the course website. So this is a simple interface. The first time you log in, you simply click that you have forgotten your password so that you get a new one. And with that you can then always log in. You will always see all courses you're registered for, which might in this case just be cryptography. And there you can find all the exercise sheets for download. They are also for download on the website, but here you find the individual listing of tasks 1, 2, 3, 4, each of them worth 4 points and stuff like that. And so please tick your results there always before the lecture. I'll come to the specific deadlines in a moment. And then we will generate our lists of who to ask for each question based on your ticks there. You generally do not need to upload anything there, so you will see that the individual tasks all have the option to upload. We are not going to be using this except for the bonus tasks. So for the bonus tasks, which are programming tasks, you will always be asked to upload a little bit. Your code, your solution, something to document what you did. But for the other tasks, it's not necessary to upload your stuff. You just need to have it ready for the exercises. Somebody is writing that the website does not work. Is that normal? No, this is absolutely not normal. Let me just check out what's up with this, or if it works for me. I'm not sure if you're referring to the Stix website or the EAK website, but in any case, I can open it with no problem, and it's also not particularly slow. But what is slow is STIX. So I can already promise you that this is a bit of an ancient system. I apologize for that, but it was not our main priority for preparing the online teaching this term to speed it up. So STIX sometimes has this issue that when it tries to synchronize your data with TU Graz Online, because it does always look up in TU Graz Online which students are registered, so everybody who's registered has an account here. And then whenever it does that, it takes a very long time. In particular, if we have courses with many students who are all updated at once, like we are running InfoSec there now, the team registration, and there are 400 people, and if several of them are logging in and TU Graz is thinking, well, STIX doesn't like that. It is not built to scale well. So it would be great, as recommended in the chat, to not wait until the last second to submit. Of course, not everything is lost if you fail to submit because STIX is down or so. Of course, it will always be possible to do what people usually call nachkreuzen. So if it didn't work for you, then you tell us at the beginning of the lecture that you missed some of these update, or you still wanted to update, you tell us what, and we manually update it. But we would prefer if you can keep that to a minimum, since it's quite a bit of work for us to always find the students, find the ticks and so on. So try to get it there, but don't panic in case it doesn't work. We know that it's slow. Okay, it's also not built using the most modern web technologies. Apologies for that, it's partially my fault, but there it is. Okay, so this is STIX. You've now heard enough bad things about it, but it's still reasonably serviceable and will collect all your ticks faithfully. It should also usually send you confirmation emails after you tick something. So in case you're not sure, just check your emails and it will tell you what you ticked. I already mentioned the bonus tasks that we have a few times. So each week on the assignment sheet, there will be typically one bonus task. It's marked with this little laptop symbol here. And this means that it usually involves some programming, whereas the other questions are usually just pen and paper answers. So if you solve these, you get some extra bonus point, namely half a point for every task you solve. So in total, we will have around 10 exercise sheets, give or take a few. So you will be able to collect something like 5 or 6 extra points with these bonus tasks. What's important to know is that you will see in the online system, it says that these tasks are worth 0 points. This simply means that they are not counted towards the 50% limit. They're a separate category of their own. So the 50% is just with respect to the standard tasks. You also tick them in STIX like the other ones, but here we would ask you to also upload your code. This is not so critical this year, but it was important in the previous years, where we would then use the uploaded code to show the solutions in the exercise session. Since this year you're all online anyways, you can also share it yourselves, but we still kept this rule for consistency reasons. And these will also be presented by some of you. Whoever ticked it, we will choose somebody. Okay, so this is where you find the bonus tasks. They are hosted by our local Capture the Flag team, and you will find them hidden somewhere in between lots of other interesting challenges. So if you are into information security in general, you might also want to look at some of the other tasks there. You will find all the current tasks in the category marked AK1. You might have guessed this is still a reference to the old name of this course. And there you will find already the first bonus task for next week's practicals, which is called Dr. Visionaire. Again, guess you can already guess which crypto scheme it is about. So this is what I wanted to tell you about the bonus tasks. Now let's have a nice overview of the rest of this course and our schedule for it. So what we're planning to do is to have the lecture every day in the slot from 3 to 5. Since there are very many Fridays this year, 2 more than usual, we will have approximately 14 or so lecture units on different topics. And before that, there will always be the exercises which always refer to the content of the previous week. What credentials you should use for Fuzzyland? You can set up your own credentials. Anybody can register. It's not tied in any way whatsoever to TU Graz Online. We also don't check whether you actually enter your result in Fuzzyland. So just if you want to appear in the list of all-time best participants, then you can sign up, but you don't have to. You can just also use the interface without registering at all. So you just interact with the server that is posted there, but you don't need to register your result. Okay, so back to the schedule here. You will see that in 2 of the weeks we will not have a lecture or a regular exercise, and this is when the practical exams are taking place. So usually the exercises will take about a bit less than 1 hour, but in these cases for the exercise exams, these will take approximately 1.5 hours, plus some extra time to manage all the setup and so on. So they will last long enough to also reach into the lectures, and we will probably not have any lectures on these days. We are considering to set up some quizzes as a short replacement for the lectures, but we will notify you of that soon enough. You also see the first exam slot, which is on the 29th of January during the regular lecture time. So you should hopefully have time there. What are the topics that we are planning to cover? So today I just want to start with a little overview and some historical ciphers. And starting from next week, we will first have several lectures on symmetric primitives. So on the building blocks of symmetric schemes, which includes block ciphers such as the AES, but we will see there are also plenty of other ways to build a cipher. So we will look in particular on lightweight schemes, we will look at stream ciphers, we will look at some more modern primitives like the permutation inside the hash function SHA-3 and so on. And in particular, the last of these symmetric primitive slots will be entirely devoted to cryptanalysis. So here we will have a look at one basic symmetric cryptanalysis technique, which is still one of the most powerful attacks known today, and which is crucial to consider in the design of schemes. Namely, we're going to look at differential cryptanalysis. After that, we are going to, I will answer the questions that are popping up here in a moment. Let's first go through the rest of the schedule. So after the symmetric primitives, we are going to have a look at symmetric modes of operation, meaning recipes for how to use these primitives in order to achieve authentication or encryption. So some of the contents here will seem familiar to you from information security, but again, it will be a lot more detailed. And you will also get your own hands dirty and try to break some of them or some of the constructions. So this will entertain us in total for about 1.5 months or so. Afterwards, we are going to move on to asymmetric cryptography. So we are currently planning to have 3 lectures on asymmetric primitives, which includes stuff you already know, such as RSA, but also stuff you don't probably know, such as elliptic curves, post-quantum primitives, and so on. And after that, it's again time to look at recipes on how we can use not only these asymmetric primitives, but all of this stuff in order to build something useful. So we're going to look at different types of protocols here, and maybe some other some other topics that are closer to practice and closer to the application layer of things. And at the very end, we will just have a short outro lecture. Okay, so let's now have a look at the questions that popped up here in the meantime. So there was something about the 50% on both exams or in general. There is no limit on the individual exams. You only have to get at least 16 points in total from the practical exams. It doesn't even have to be from the exams alone. We also count the bonus points toward that. So in case you ticked everything and you did all the challenges, then you already have something like 9 points. And then if you get at least half the points on one of the 2 KU exams, you are already positive. But to be honest, if you did all the exercises and you solved all the bonus challenges, then I'm pretty sure you will also get all the points on the practical exams. So no limit on where you take your 16 points or 50% from, anything counts. There was a second longer question, let me just read that. Is there an alternative way to get at least some points from the exercises? Let me see. Even when not present. I have another course with mandatory presence at that time in October. This is a problem because we don't generally have a general alternative mode for presence. I think in your case, it would be best if you get in touch with us via email or similar after the lecture, and we'll try to figure out in detail how long is this overlap and so on. So I hope this is something that only concerns Hannes and not too many other people. If there are more other people concerned by this, please let me know in the messages. If it's just Hannes, we'll see what we can come up with. There's another question. So 50% from homeworks and 50% from exams to pass the KU. Yeah, that's a good summary. So the points that give you your final grade are from the exams. And these points need to be at least 16, so at least 50% of the total exam points to pass. In addition to that, you need to have ticked at least 50% of all homework exercises. But the homeworks otherwise contribute just a few bonus points to your final grade. So the main thing that influences your grade is the exams. Okay, let's get back to the slides and let's have something to drink. I think it wasn't such a great idea to have both information security and cryptography on Friday because my throat definitely doesn't like it. But I'll get used to it, I guess. So, where are we? Yeah, team and timing. So I've already announced some of the names involved in the lecture. Namely, I'm going to do most of the symmetric lectures, so the first half of the lecture part. And then you will meet Daniel again, who will do most of the second half of the lecture. So many things about, so some of the lectures on protocols and asymmetric primitives in particular. And he also knows everything about the bonus task test system. So if you have any technical questions there, he would be a good place to start. So this is about the lecture. Now, for the exercises, you will notice that you already had to sign up for one of 2 groups. So our idea was as follows. Usually it was always the lecturers who did the exercises as well. This year our plan is that the lecturers, so myself and Daniel, are going to cover one of the 2 groups that you could sign up for the practicals, namely group number 1. So if you signed up for group number 1, we will be your teaching assistants for this, for the practical part. If you signed up for group 2, then Marcel Nageler is going to be your teaching assistant. So he's also currently a master student and did this course previously. Regarding the technicalities, our current plan is that the group number 1, so this group here, from myself and Daniel, would be happening in Microsoft Teams. And the second group is currently planned to take place in Discord. So you already saw there that there are some voice channels, and we're going to use one of them to conduct the exercises there. So in Discord, you can similarly share your camera and share your screen in order to present the exercises. So if you notice that you signed up for a team whose technical solution doesn't work for you, either switch teams, or if there's many of you, let us know. We haven't done this sort of exercises online before, so if we figure out sometime during the term that the solution we currently have doesn't work, we might also switch to some other platform. But currently, half of you is planned for Teams and half of you is planned for Discord. You can still switch groups in case you already know that one of the two doesn't work for you. Due to the size limit that we have, we still ask you to keep distributed as nicely, evenly as you currently are. So I checked right before the lecture and we had exactly 40 people in the one group and exactly 40 people in the other, which is great. So please try to keep it approximately balanced. This is important because, of course, we want that all of you get the chance to present something like 2 times per semester or so. We don't have a minimum limit, so if it doesn't work out, it won't be a problem for your grade or so, but we would still like to hear as much as possible from all of you. Actually, when we decided to have only 2 groups for the exercises, I was still expecting a number of participants closer to last year. So then the groups would have been something like 25 people. Now we're a bit more, which is great on the one hand, because it's great that so many of you are interested in information security and cryptography, but of course the limit is a bit unfortunate. So somebody commented, you can't switch except on the waiting list. Yes, that is correct. So if you absolutely need to switch, please do so and you will end up on the waiting list. We might adapt the size limit a tiny bit, so something like 42 or maybe 45, but we don't want to end up with one group of 55 people and one of 35 or 25. So please try to keep it balanced and really only switch or choose the fuller group in case you're sure that the other setup isn't working well for you. Switching the groups shouldn't confuse sticks too much, I hope, but in case you see some effects of that, or you see something like some of your ticks or so have disappeared, just tell us and we'll fix it again. This is also a good point where your confirmation emails come in handy, because you can be sure what you actually ticked. If you have any general questions on the administrative stuff or so, I'm the person you should be harassing with it, or you should target your questions to. If you have some technical questions on the fuzzy-land stuff or so, Daniel is also a good contact point. And of course, if you have questions on a specific lecture, just contact the corresponding lecturer. But if you have a question like, can I do an exam? I'm the person to ask. What else is there to say? I promised some more information on the exact timeline, or when we start with things. So the current plan is that the deadline for ticking tasks is half an hour before the official start of the practicals. So at 1:30, please try to have all your sticks online in the system. The practicals show up from 2 to 3 in the TU Graz online calendar. However, what we're planning to do is to start around 2:15 and end around 3 o'clock. One of the reasons for this is that we share some resources with SSD, Secure Software Development, which many of you might also be participating in, and which takes until around 2. So we want to avoid an overlap here. If you have any other conflicts or so for the practicals, please let us know. So the plan is to start approximately at 2:15, then take approximately until 3, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter. And then we will have a 15-minute break or buffer or synchronization time. Because of course the 2 exercise groups might sometimes have different speeds or so on. So sometimes some of you might have a longer break and the others might have a shorter break. And the lecture is then going to continue at 3:15, so same time as today. Here you again find the information which group is supervised by whom, and in which technical channel. So the lecture should start at around 3:15 and take until around 4:45 or 5, something around that time. And we plan to keep this setup at least for the near future. So to keep doing this lecture in MS Teams and streaming it as a backup solution on YouTube. If you experience any troubles with this, please let us know. So this is the first time I'm using Teams for this sort of setup. So if it doesn't work for you, or if the slides are all blurry or something like that, please let us know and we'll try to optimize it throughout the term. I hope so far the slides were reasonably well readable. So we originally had a different setup where you were seeing the same slides with me inside them here as you see on YouTube. But people complained that the slides were very blurry then. I see there are some questions. So a comment that everything works, that makes me happy, of course. And there was some question, but it's hard to scroll to the right point because it keeps getting updates. So let me see. Is there a rule like in analysis that if you tick something you didn't do, you get 0 points in the whole assignment? Ah, yes, the rules for cheaters. Okay, I was hoping we could get around those. So usually if you tick something and you present it and it's not entirely correct, but it's a believable effort, then it's okay for us. So if it's something that we believe you believe to be correct, fine, okay. If you have absolutely nothing to show at all or have no idea what exactly you're showing because it's not your own solution, then we will mark this down as a little comment. We will probably ask you very soon in the next exercise group or so, or try to in some other way verify whether you solved the example. So for example, we might ask you to show us your solution right afterwards. So if you're trying to cheat the system and we see that 2 times or so, then yes, we will also remove your other ticks for that date, or if it occurs repeatedly and if it clearly looks like cheating, then we're going to give out a negative grade. But usually we didn't have much of the problem with this in the previous time. So we had 1 or 2 cases where people didn't show up in the practicals despite ticking things. In that case, we will delete the ticks for the day, but it will not have that many long-term consequences. If it's a believable mistake, so your solution is simply wrong or it's not entirely complete, that's okay. So since the ticks don't have that much of an influence on the grade, that's fine. So in all of these practicals, the process of you doing things is a lot more important for us than whether the final result is exactly as we imagined it. So often there are alternative things to do, or often you just don't see that your solution isn't complete yet. That's completely fine for us. Yeah. So if we don't have the feeling that you are trying to cheat us, we will also be friendly to you. That's the summary essentially. But what is important to keep in mind is to please only tick stuff if you also are able to show up in the exercises. And if something changes last minute, so for example, I don't know, usually the example was somebody has a biking accident on the way to the practicals or so, just drop us an email as soon as possible and we'll figure out what to do, or we'll try to find a solution that works for everybody. So just to summarize again, we usually don't have any problems with this sort of thing. This is because, unlike in many of the bachelor courses, here there are mostly people who are actually interested in information security, which is why they chose this major or minor for their masters. So you will notice that also in the other master's courses that you're probably starting now, your fellow students are typically a lot more motivated here and are a lot less likely to try to cheat or get around the rules or something. which is why you will also notice that many of the master's lectures have less strict rules than the bachelor's lectures. Okay, yeah, let's get back to the final notes here. So here's just a collection of links again, such as the Discord link, which you will find on the website, which you will find on the website, and the Stix link. Are there any other questions on the administrative stuff at this point? Now, thanks to your questions and all the extra Corona rules, this part has already taken a bit longer than planned, so I might have to speed up a bit for the actual content. But still, if you have any questions, feel free. But I'm not going to wait too long, since you can interrupt me anyways. Let's have a look at, or let's have a first overview of some of the basic principles that of cryptology that will lead us a bit to what will happen in the following lectures. So what I want to do here is I want to discuss some very fundamental concepts, some basic words that are going to pop up in all of the following lectures, and also have a look at some historical ciphers and what we can learn from them. So which of the ingredients we can borrow from modern ciphers, but why they are not secure by themselves. That's essentially the goal of this part here. So this is what we want to discuss. First, some general goals of cryptography, or of that we want to achieve with this sort of mechanisms. Then some predecessors of modern primitives, in particular stream ciphers and a basic concept of block ciphers, and some words about security notions. So what we try to achieve in all of this is some sort of secure communication. So our setups in the following are always going to look like this. We have two people who want to talk to each other, called Alice and Bob, and Alice wants to transmit some sort of message to Bob in the most prototypical scenario. Sometimes we will see that there are 3 or more people. Sometimes Alice and Bob will have very specific roles or so, but we will get to that when necessary. But the basic setup is this. If Alice wants to talk to Bob and they have a trusted channel that they can use, then everything is fine. We need no cryptography. We do need cryptography as soon as another party, namely Eve, steps in. And what Eve does is Eve tries to eavesdrop or manipulate some of the content that is transmitted over this channel. So Eve sort of controls the communication channel that we are using, which makes it an untrusted channel. And in that case, to fix this, to still be able to do trusted communication, we need some cryptographic schemes where we process the message we originally want to send. We need, for this to work, we need to come up with some additional assets that we shift our trust to, namely the keys. So Alice and Bob somehow need to come up with suitable keys, which may be the same, may be different, and then use these keys together with some algorithmic description to process the data before transmitting. And the output of this scheme is then usually called something like the ciphertext or the cryptogram. So cryptogram is a sort of more general term for ciphertext and may include more things such as an authentication checksum or things like that. So this is just to recall some of the words that you probably already know from information security. So we call Alice and Bob the entities or parties in this system. Eve is what we call the adversary, so a person with malicious intent who wants to destroy the trust in our communication channel. We have some messages that we want to transmit, sometimes also called a plaintext P. And what we get out of the algorithm, in the simplest case, which is encryption, is the ciphertext. And we call these algorithms that Alice and Bob use to process their message schemes, or sometimes algorithms, or sometimes ciphers, or sometimes primitives. We will get into the distinction between all of these words in the next week. And finally, we also have a cryptographic protocol, which tells us how exactly do we use the scheme. So in the previous picture, the protocol was simply Alice puts a secret key and the message into the encryption scheme and sends the result to Bob, and Bob has a similar key, puts it into his decryption machine and gets the message. That's the protocol. That's it. But we will, of course, see more complicated protocols later. And one of the underlying principles in all of this is Kerckhoffs's principle, named after August Kerckhoffs, a Dutch cryptographer, who has postulated a number of principles, some of which are no longer really relevant today, but one of them is really sticking with us. And that is the basic principle that in the scheme we saw in the previous picture, the algorithms themselves should be considered public. And the security should rest entirely on the secret keys or on the key material. So instead of having a secret algorithm, we should have an open source algorithm and compress the secret part into one small fixed size little object that we can easily exchange and then we can easily protect. And this is also known as Shannon's maxim, because Claude Shannon phrased it in a similar way by saying that the enemy knows the system. So this is a basic assumption that we have to make, where the system refers to the algorithms in use. And this is the exact opposite of the concept of security by obscurity. And thankfully, this is today something that pretty much all cryptographers agree on, that this is a good approach. The algorithm should be publicly verifiable and auditable, and the secrets themselves should be easy to exchange and be as small and simple as possible. This is of course also good for me as a cryptographer, because if I build cryptographic designs and have to keep them all secret, then I'm somehow a person in a very risky situation, because there are many people whose interest it is to either extract the information, namely the algorithm, from me, or people who are actual users of the system who want to avoid that I tell anyone else, and which might put my life into some risk or so, or would have in case we didn't have public algorithms. So in modern cryptography, we have two main families of algorithms, which reflect sort of two different perspectives. And the first is the much more classical perspective, which we have in symmetric cryptography, where we consider a team of insiders, Alice and Bob, whose roles are more or less interchangeable. They have exactly the same key material, they completely trust each other, and they do not trust anybody else, and just want to talk to each other. And the sort of opposite, which only arose in the 1970s, when cryptography suddenly became something that everybody found useful to use to protect their digital information, is the asymmetric view, which is also sort of a user-centric view. So in this view, there is one person, Alice, and Alice wants to interact with everybody else. So for example, Alice wants everybody to be able to send her messages in an encrypted way. Or Alice wants to be able to sign stuff so that everybody can verify it. So Alice is the only person who has a secret, namely her private key, and everybody else has some public information that allows them to conduct all of this. So in particular, asymmetric crypto is what we need as soon as we want to connect to somebody we don't know yet or whom we don't trust completely. Which is of course the case in all sorts of mundane situations, or whenever you're doing something on the internet, you are in this situation. But as soon as you have then connected to somebody or established a connection link, you usually switch to symmetric crypto to efficiently actually exchange your data. And the goals you want to achieve are manifold. In the first part of the lecture, we will mainly hear about the first two, namely confidentiality, so keeping the content of the communication hidden, the original message, keeping it secret, as well as authenticity and integrity. So these are two very similar terms. Integrity means that the content of my message was not manipulated in transit. And authenticity means it comes from the person I expect it to come from. And usually these two are very closely tied together, because if I receive a message and it has been manipulated by Eve, then it's no longer really from the person I expected it from. So in that case, authenticity would also be broken. And there are a couple of other notions, maybe just to clarify the vocabulary here. We're not going to go into the detail of what they mean. So availability simply means that the service remains up and running. So something that destroys availability is, for example, a DDoS attack or so. Or tricking somebody into using the wrong key material so that they can't speak to the right people anymore. There's also anonymity, which now refers not to keeping a message secret, but keeping the entity's secret in a conversation. There's non-repudiation, which means that in some cases we want that users are not able to deny having done something or having received something. Contract signing, I think, is clear. Timestamping is tying a piece of information to a certain time. Key escrow is not really a security property, but it's related to something that some secret services and similar would often like to see, namely that even in a secret conversation between two people, somebody else should be able, under certain circumstances, to drop into this conversation and listen into it if they have, for example, some legal mandate to do so. This is a bit of a borderline compared to the others. It's not really a goal of cryptography in general, I would say. But let's now have a look at a few historical ciphers, some of which I'm sure you have already heard about. And let's have a look at what their main ideas are that we can distill into something useful. A first cipher that was very popular or was used for quite a while in ancient Greece, more specifically in Sparta, is the so-called Skytale cipher. So what this is a simple transposition cipher, which can be implemented quite easily physically by writing the message you want to send on a strip of paper, and then, for example, wrapping this piece of paper around, for example, some stick with a certain width. And then instead of following the piece of paper when you read it off, you read orthogonally. So for example, if the diameter of this stick is something like 3 letters, then what this effectively does is it reads every third letter, and then every third letter starting from the second letter, and so on. So in other words, it simply changes the order of the letters, but keeps the letters themselves the same, so the set of letters. And this is of course not secure by itself, because the key size is very small, or there is it's very easy to recover much of the message by brute force. And you can also read quite a bit of information by just knowing the letters that are there, without even being able to arrange them into the correct order. For example, if this involves some numbers and you see there are only 3 digits in there in total, and you expect that this is one number, then you know the number is not larger than 999, for example. Whereas if you see 5 digits, you know it can be up to 99,999. So seeing just the letters does give you some information. So it's not secure by itself, but it's still a process that can be useful as a building block. So changing the order of things sort of puts the individual things out of context or spreads them over several places, which can be useful to achieve something called diffusion that we will see next week. What else? This is one that you almost certainly know, the Caesar cipher, the prototypical children's encryption scheme. How does it work? This time every letter stays where it is, but it is modified in a certain way. Namely, each letter of the original message is simply shifted by 3 positions in the alphabet. So for example, A becomes D, or E becomes H, and so on and so on. Or if you want to generalize it, you can replace this offset of 3 by some arbitrary offset. Again, very obviously not secure by itself, but again, actually a very useful building block that we encounter in this way, even in the AES, for example. Because what it does is it's a simple way to combine a piece of key material with a piece of message material. There is a successor of this. Oh yeah, of course you can, this has a very short key, so of course you can search it exhaustively and try all keys until you see something that makes sense to you. So in this case k equals 3 is obviously the right solution. There is a development of this that was used for a much longer time, and this is the so-called Vigenère cipher, which doesn't offset every letter by the same number of positions, but has a password of a certain length. So in this case, the password would be 0, 1, 2, 3, and shifts each letter by the corresponding letter in the password. And as soon as the password is over, but the message is still going on, you start with the beginning of the password again. So you repeat the password as often as necessary and add it to the message. What are the advantages of this? Well, first of all, you have a lot more possible keys. Because now you have not just, for example, in the simple alphabet, 26 options, but 26 to the power of the length of this password. It is, however, still breakable, but it took people quite a while to figure out how to do this well. So let's have a quick look at that. One of the main reasons underlying this, or ideas underlying this attack, is the fact that languages contain a certain amount of redundancy. So in particular, not all letters are equally likely. So for example, in English, the most frequent letters by far are E, T, and A, whereas something like J, X, and Q is very rare in typical text. And this describes the language in a sort of letter frequency vector. So you can write down the frequency of the individual letters and you get a frequency vector like this. And this is very characteristic for the language, even if we permute or exchange the individual letters. So as an example, this is the input distribution for English. And if we now look at, for example, a ciphertext of some longer text portion that was computed with Caesar cipher, then you will see something like this. This is simply a shifted version of the above, and the shift offset corresponds exactly to the key. So what you can do to find out the correct key, instead of trying all options and see whether the text makes sense, is that you can do you compute the correlation between these two vectors and shifted versions of this vector to try to find the correct offset. So this correlation is defined as follows. It's like a it's defined for each possible offset t. So t can be anything from 0 to 25. And what it does is it always it takes the original language vector and the ciphertext frequency vector and shifts the ciphertext frequency letter by t positions, and then overlays the two with each other and multiplies it, where the indices, of course, flow over to the beginning. So the idea here is that this correlation is maximum when t takes the correct value of k. And this works better the longer the ciphertext is, because then this distribution becomes more and more accurate. So why does this work? Why is this maximized for the correct key? If you want this to make sense, it's best to look at an example. So here's an example where the bottom thing is a ciphertext frequency letter. So how often does A, B, C, and so on appear in the Caesar ciphertext? And the first one is the original English alphabet. And we're now making a key guess of, let's say, 0, and computing this correlation as written above. So we multiply A by A, B by B, and so on, so the corresponding frequencies. Now, since the two are not in sync, this means that most of the time small values here are multiplied with large values here and vice versa. So it's very rare that a large number here is multiplied with a large number here because the offset is incorrect. So if we look at the individual results and sum them up, so we get essentially the area marked here in blue, we get some result. In this case, it's 200 and something. Now this result is typically not very large because any particularly large values in the one vector are reduced by a small value in the other vector. Now let's compare what happens if we have the correct key guess. So this is now if we have shifted the ciphertext alphabet by the correct amount so that it approximately matches the real English distribution. What we see now is that large pieces or large probabilities are multiplied with large probabilities and small ones with small ones. And as it so happens, this in total gives very large values whenever we square these large values here. And in total, we receive a much bigger area than in the other case. So this is a sort of visualization of why the correlation takes a large value when we have the correct offset here. So how can we apply this to Vigenère? We can actually do essentially the same thing because Vigenère just consists of a number of Caesars. And how many different Caesars depends on the length of the password. So this makes the recovery a two-phase process. We first need to guess the period, so the length of the password. And then the second step, we then try to break all the individual Caesar schemes by using the technique we saw before. And one possibility to recover the period D is, of course, to try all possible ones that we can think of. So we can try, is the length 2, 3, 4, 5? In each of these cases, do a key recovery and then see what works best. Or we can try to numerically estimate how good this period looks. And one of the ways to do this is to compute the number of situations where, for a particular guessed length of the password T, we try how often is it the case that the ith letter is equal to the I plus tth letter. So in other words, we look at two copies of our ciphertext shifted by a particular guessed length of the password, and then we see how often values match. And the thing is that since some of the letters are a lot more frequent than others, this means also that the likelihood that we have a match is a lot higher in case we have a correct offset. So this is a very fundamental idea or insight actually that we will see a couple of more times. That if you have a number of different values and they're uniformly distributed, then you will only have a medium number of collisions. Whereas if some of them are more likely, then you will have a higher number of collisions. Something similar happens here. So by maximizing this value here, we can get an estimate for the period. It might be that the result here is not the actual length, but for example, some multiple of the length. Because in this particular sample, this gives a similarly good result. And once we have recovered the period, we can apply the previous algorithm to every subgroup and thus recover the key. Hint, you will have to do something like that in the exercises. So we saw now that the ciphers are not secure according to our current standards, but there are some building blocks that we might use. There is one interesting intermediate sort of cipher, which is on the one hand very close to these classical ciphers and relatively old, but which is secure even for today's standards. And this cipher is the so-called Vernam scheme or one-time pad. And this is sort of like a Vigenère cipher, but with an infinitely long password. So it tries to avoid the attack we previously saw by simply making the password infinitely long. So in other words, to encrypt one message, we always need to generate a fresh password which is exactly as long as the message, so a long key. And then we compute the ciphertext simply as the addition of the two strings. Now in the examples here we're doing that over the alphabet, but the more minimalistic approach or the more computer science-y approach is of course to take not the real alphabet but bits as the alphabet, so that you simply generate a bit string which is as long as the message and XOR each bit of this password or key to the corresponding position in the message. So addition modulo 2 would in this case simply be an XOR computation. Now, spoiler, this scheme actually provides what is called perfect secrecy. Now, what does this mean and why does it work? Consider the following. Assume that you have, as an attacker, intercepted some ciphertext, for example, QUIZZ, and you want to find out, you try to guess the key. Now, this is a very short message, so the key is also short, so you can simply try all possible options. But the thing is that for every possible plaintext that this message could mean, there is actually a corresponding key that would translate the message to exactly this ciphertext. So it's absolutely impossible, no matter that I can evaluate all possible passwords, it's still impossible for me to verify is the correct key, for example, this one here, which decrypts it to apple, or is it that one, which decrypts it to lemon, or this other one. So for every 5-letter word that the plaintext could have been, there is a corresponding key that decrypts it. And I have no way of verifying whether my guess is correct. So in this sense, or also from an information theoretic perspective, the ciphertext contains no information whatsoever about the message. It's not just that I can computationally not recover it, it actually does not contain this information. So the only information that is contained is the length of the original message, which may of course give some clues by itself, but apart from that, the attacker does not learn anything. Okay, so that sounds great. Why aren't we using this for everything? Well, there are a few reasons. First of all, of course, these long keys are completely unpractical. It's very unclear how you would exchange these keys, how you would store all the necessary key material. Effectively, what you've created is a situation where protecting the new asset, the key, is just as hard as protecting the original asset, which is the message. So why should it be easier to keep the key of a very long length secret? Why should this be easier than the message? Of course, I can pre-distribute some of the keys. So in some organizations, it's still the case that people carry around, well, not code books of infinitely long passwords, but files with the corresponding content. But for practical applications, this is pretty useless. And there are also some other issues. And one of them is that it's impossible to detect for the recipient whether the message was modified. So this provides perfect secrecy against an attacker who only wants to learn the contents. But of course, an attacker can easily modify the contents and the recipient won't really notice, will receive the wrong message. So for example, if you think that the message is some number encoded in bits, and you assume this is, for example, I don't know, your bank balance, your current balance, and it's probably a small number. If the attacker intercepts this in progress, so while it's in the communication channel, and toggles the topmost bit, then this small value will almost certainly become a large value. We don't know which one, but we've modified it. So the recipient will receive the wrong message. So what modern cryptographic schemes try to do better than Vernam is they may not provide perfect secrecy in the sense that the ciphertext contains no information at all, but they still provide secrecy or confidentiality in the sense that it's computationally infeasible for an attacker to recover the contents. Modern schemes try to do this with small keys and still with a fast algorithm. Actually, we still often see at conferences, for example, when reviewing, you still often see submissions where people try to somehow improve the Van Am scheme in some way, or they are fascinated by this fact that it provides perfect secrecy, and they try to improve it in some way, or try to argue that it's the right solution. And these papers are almost always complete bullshit. So whenever somebody tries to sell you something and it says Van Am scheme or one-time pad or perfect secrecy, I would be very careful if I were in your shoes, because this is very often based on only a very rudimentary understanding of cryptography. Okay, but still people have tried ways of including at least some of these ideas. So instead of having an infinitely long magical key that is added to my message, they try to build some sort of machine to generate such a long key. And by inputting in the beginning only some small secret and then letting the machine do the rest. And one of these instantiations is the so-called stream cipher model, where you have a system where you input a small seed, the key, and then you have some algorithm that updates its current state on and on and on and on, and always publishes part of this state or some value derived from this state. And this is then used as a key stream. So for example, the thing in here might be something like a linear feedback shift register. And this might be something like a nonlinear output filter function. And you will find this or variants of this in many modern ciphers. This is also sometimes referred to as a pseudo-random number generator, where you input a small seed and then it generates you random looking numbers which are not actually random because they can all be recomputed from this small seed. Now in this way you definitely lose perfect secrecy, because now not any message is possible anymore when I observe a ciphertext. Only at most something like 2 to the size of the key different possible messages can be computed this way, or can be constructed this way, which is definitely not all possible messages. However, they can still often be practically secure. Unfortunately, they often are not, so stream ciphers are a bit out of fashion these days, and one of the reasons is that there have been a number of outdated stream ciphers that have been used way too long in some well-known public systems. So one of these well-known ciphers is RC4, which is broken among other things because the randomness it generates actually has a small bias in it. So it doesn't even look random. Some bit combinations are more frequent than others. And this was supported both by old SSL and TSL versions, but also by different Wi-Fi protocols. There are also stream ciphers in mobile phone networks. So in particular, there is a series of ciphers called A5 something, and unfortunately the older ones of those are also broken. That doesn't mean that there aren't secure stream ciphers. So one example is ChaCha20, which is a building block of the encryption scheme or one of the possible encryption schemes in TLS version 1.3, which is the most recent version. But you don't see as many stream ciphers as you see block ciphers typically. So what is this idea of block ciphers, or what does it have to do with classical schemes? So if you look at something like the Caesar encryption we had before, and you try to make this a bit more complicated, to have a larger key space. For example, you say that you don't shift each letter by the same amount, but you replace each letter according to some formula with another letter. So in other words, you write down a permutation of the letters here in the lower half of the table, and then always translate the upper letter to the lower letter. So it's like a lookup table. This drastically increases the number of possible keys you have. So in total, if we do it with the normal alphabet, you have 26 factorial letters, which is in a range that is almost secure by almost secure by modern standards. So you have, this is more than 80-bit security. However, this doesn't mean that it's equally secure as some other ciphers with 80-bit keys, because the thing is, even though the key space is large, the blocks you're working with are so small that you can still do a frequency analysis. So for example, it will still be easy to pick out which letter corresponds to an E in this thing. And if you have enough data, you might even be able to tell the E's and the T's and the A's and so on, which means you learn something about the message, which you shouldn't. How can you make it even more complicated to get something useful? You can try to make your alphabet larger by grouping blocks of characters into one character and then making a larger lookup table. Looks nice. The size of the key space is now astronomical, so any possible permutation of, in this case, 4-block words would be a possible key. So the key is this entire lookup table. But the downside is, even though you have gazillion many keys, this is not a very practical cipher. Because the table will soon become very large, it will be hard to exchange, and it's also a bit inconvenient to implement. Because in order to really avoid frequency analysis, you would need really large blocks, so that even normal words or so are no longer easily recognizable because they're rare enough. And the larger the blocks, the more secure, but the less usable. So we would need to go back to take again some of the Caesar ideas and try to recompute this table in some way from some function, from some algorithm and a key. And in that case, we could then, instead of transmitting or storing the entire table, we could just write down the function we used and maybe the key input we used. And to build this function, maybe we can use some of the ideas that we saw in the other ciphers, such as transposition of elements and adding key elements and small lookup tables. And this is essentially what how many modern block ciphers are constructed. So they try to build something which looks like a completely random lookup table, but which is actually not a completely random lookup table. So block ciphers are typically much more well known than stream ciphers, so you will certainly have heard of AES and maybe its predecessor DES, which shouldn't be used anymore nowadays. What these block ciphers still need in order to work is some sort of mode of operation. The same thing is of course also true for stream ciphers to some extent. And with that, we'll use the last 2 minutes or so to discuss some security notions, or to recap some vocabulary from security notions. The main question I want to answer here is, where does this security really come from? So at which layer in the crypto stack does it arise? And this is actually not so easy to answer. So there are two main layers that we are going to discuss in this lecture, or maybe three. And the first of these is the ingredients that we have, so the cryptographic primitives. These are the smallest building blocks that by themselves still have a meaningful security level. So these are objects where you can say this thing has, for example, 128-bit security. It's just a small block cipher or lookup table. It doesn't achieve any practical target yet, but it's the ingredient for it. And all the nutritions that we will have in the end are from these ingredients. But to make it useful, to make it digestible, you need some recipe, which is a mode of operation, or on a higher level a protocol, to make it into something digestible. So, and the security on these different layers comes from different things. So on the bottommost layer in the cryptographic primitives, these are the foundation in the sense that they can't really derive their security from anything else. They're atomic in a sense. So to assert how secure these are, we need to perform cryptanalysis. We need to try to break them with all means we have. And some example of these crypto primitives are, on the one hand, what we call hard mathematical problems or complexity theoretical problem, like for example the integer factoring problem or the discrete logarithm problem. These are the basis for the primitives we have in asymmetric crypto. But in symmetric cryptography, we usually build our own primitives, such as a block cipher. And each of these is sort of their own, well, not well-known hard problem, but at least a hard problem that has been analyzed over a couple of years by many clever people. So this is why we typically, when we design a new cipher, say that it shouldn't be immediately adopted, because we need to first gain some sort of trust with it by performing cryptanalysis. Once we do have some primitives that we trust, we can then on top do some reduction proofs to mathematically prove that the layers on top, the constructions we build from them, achieve certain cryptographic properties. And to make the overall thing secure, both the ingredients must be good and the modes must be good. We gain trust on the one hand by trying to break the primitives and then trying to evaluate how hard it is. And then on the other hand, we can do a reduction proof, which says something like, if this protocol can be broken, it must be the fault of the underlying primitive. And then the primitive we need to trust by long evaluation. Now, we need to be careful when interpreting what we get as a result here, because we always only prove certain properties. So security always only means what we first chose it to mean, neither more nor less. So this is very important when applying this crypto scheme somewhere. I think I'm going to move these different keywords for the security analysis to the next lecture, because we are really stretching our time limits since we started a bit late. So let me just skip these few slides here and jump right to the questions. First, I just want to give a short summary of what we heard today. So we saw some ideas about ingredients we can borrow from historical ciphers, such as transposition or lookup tables or adding keys. And we saw that these can be useful building blocks, which by themselves do not provide security, but if you put them together in a meaningful way, which we will analyze next week, then you can get something that we can consider a secure primitive. So the primitive is sort of where you bootstrap the security level. And then on top of that, which is what we're going to look at afterwards in November or so, you can build modes of operation which then achieve something actually practical. So the primitive is just a building block, and the mode or the protocol makes the actual product. Okay, I'm ready to take some questions right now. Otherwise, if you still wait here for a few minutes, we can also, after we finish the stream, we can allow all of you to test how well their team setup works. So if you want to test whether your camera works, whether your screen sharing works, whether your microphone works, you can do that afterwards. If there is enough demand, we can also set up a separate testing slot sometime early next week or so. Are there any questions on any of this, or which questions do you have? While we're waiting here, I'm also ending the YouTube stream, which will remain online at least for a few days and will afterwards probably be moved to an uploaded video file that you can download from our servers. So bye YouTube in the meantime, and I'm still waiting for questions or attempts to test your setup on Teams.